Online.com recruiting analyst and great friend of the program, Hank South. And Hank, it's been a little while, but great to have you back here on Southern Fried Sports.
Yeah, it has. Thanks for having me back on.
So since we last spoke, Hank, you've been to San Antonio for the All-American game out there. And Alabama in that little stretch there got some really nice news, didn't it? Especially on the defensive side of the ball.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, overall, it was a great week for Alabama at the All-American Bowl in San Antonio. The most notable news being the two commitments they got during the actual game last Saturday in Chris Bogle and Marcus Banks. Chris Bogle is actually, he's one of the more exciting players in this class, in my opinion. A lot of people had him tabbed to Miami. It makes sense. He's from Fort Lauderdale. Miami's been recruiting him for a long, long time, close to Manny Diaz. But it was actually Alabama that he chose instead to commit to. So we'll be watching him this month, as obviously he did not sign because he can't sign until February 6th. And then Marcus Banks, who looks like he actually did sign and just didn't tell anybody until he announced his commitment at the game, because right after he announced, Alabama tweeted out welcoming him into the class, which they can only do if I believe if they have a national letter of intent.
Right.
So two really big pickups, obviously. Big position of need with Bogle at that jack linebacker spot after they missed on Kayvon Thibodeau and weren't able to flip Nolan Smith in the end. So big pickup there. And then obviously Marcus Banks adds a lot of talent at the cornerback position as well. So beyond that, the Alabama commits in the game, Alabama commits and signees that played in the game, Antonio Alfano, Byron Young, those two had great weeks. Christian Harris looked really strong at inside linebacker, playing that position for the first time. And then Trey Sanders, did his thing in practice. Didn't have the best game, but running backs aren't really utilized as much in those types of settings. And then lastly, Talia Tagovailoa didn't actually play as he continues to nurse a shoulder injury. So I think overall it was a really great week, and I think some Bama commits could definitely see that in the rankings when the final rankings come out for 2019.
So let's reset things, Hank, as we talk about this 2019 recruiting class for the Alabama Crimson Tide. Really, I guess we're looking at just a handful of spots, right? Although Alabama is able to back count, I guess, 2 or 3 guys to 2018. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think the total, this is always kind of that time of the year where your math skills really have to come out, but they had I think they had 3 spots from the 2018 cycle that went unused. So therefore they can back count 3 of the early enrollees in 2019 to those 2018 spots. So it should, by the math, give them 28 spots to use in 2019. I think there's other ways they can kind of work with the numbers. Obviously, there's different methods we've seen in the past, whether it's blue shirting, gray shirting, however it can get done. Alabama is able to kind of, the number game always works out for Alabama. So, but with that being said, with the addition of Chris Bogle and Marcus Banks last weekend, I believe, and I know Tim Watts reported this on Bama Online, there's about 5 spots left, but that's also including the guys already committed. So when we're talking about guys that aren't already committed to Alabama, I think there's 2 to 4 maybe, I think, in that range, depending on what happens with those guys that opted not to sign early. Whether they end up in the class or not will obviously affect how many Alabama can end up taking that they're still recruiting. So a few spots left, but plenty of guys to talk about and a ton of storylines to watch heading into February 6th.
And Hank right now at BamaOnline.com has a wonderful piece outlining every bit of how this thing could go in the remaining weeks coming up to the late signing day. So you want to check that out right now. Just posted that a couple hours ago at BamaOnline.com. Now, let's go on the high side of the available spots in this 2019 class that are still out there. In a sort of dream scenario, who are the 4 guys who would fill those 4 spots if everything went right, in your opinion, for Nick Saban and his staff?
Yeah, I think the dream finish would obviously include holding on to Byron Young. I think that's a lot of people. Somehow there's this rumor floating around, and I think it's more people in Mississippi that are trying to kind of get it out there. But there's a rumor floating around that Bama doesn't want Byron Young, which is not true. So I think he's certainly part of that dream finish. As far as guys that aren't already committed, I would say Henry To'oTo'o, the 4-star linebacker from California. is in the equation as far as dream finish. Ismail Sopsher, the number 1 defensive tackle in the country, who is still unsigned, debating between Alabama, LSU, and a few others. He's in that group. And then beyond that, I don't think you're ever hurting yourself when you're adding defensive linemen. I think a guy like Nathan Pickering would be a huge pickup if they were able to fit him into the class. And I think they also want to sign 2 running backs. That's why we've seen them pursue Trey Sanders so hard and got him signed, and then try to hold on to Keelan Robinson as well. So I think holding on to Keelan Robinson would also be part of the ideal finish. We'll see kind of how Raekwon Davis opting to stay at Alabama will affect that, whether they try to push for more defensive linemen. I don't think that's going to affect their kind of pursuit of guys like Ismail Sopsher or Nathan Pickering. It always could. Maybe Bama decides to circle back on a wide receiver this month if there's some guys they like that are available. That's always possible as well. So, I think 2 guys I think that they really are pushing to add are Henry To'oTo'o and Byron Young as far as the unsigned guys. And as far as the commitments, I think Byron Young is one they really would like to hold on to come February.
Talking with Hank South, recruiting analyst for BamaOnline.com on a Thursday edition of Southern Fried Sports presented by Carty and Lloyd Attorneys at Law and Mercedes-Benz of Tuscaloosa. News on BamaOnline.com this morning, Hank, involving the departures of offensive line coach Brent Key and wide receivers coach Josh Gaddis. And just from a recruiting perspective, that would seem to be a couple of big losses. These guys have been integral into what Alabama's been able to accomplish in this 2019 cycle, right?
Absolutely. They've been 2 of them as top recruiters. Josh Gaddis obviously has only been with the staff for a year, but what he was able to do in that year has been really important for their recruiting efforts in both the 2019 classes and 2020 classes. Same thing with Brent Key. Obviously he has the deep in-state ties to Alabama. He's been big at Hewitt-Trussville, landing all of those guys. But I think going forward, I don't think we'll really know the true full impact of what this means until we see who replaces those 2, and whether there's any other staff changes as well, for that matter. But I've already reached out to a few of the Alabama commitments that were recruited by Brent Key and by Josh Gaddis. They all know that this is what happens sometimes. Coaches change up positions a lot, so there's not a lot of concern at this point. Every commitment I've talked to that has one of those guys as their primary recruiter says it's not going to affect them at all. And I think it's funny. I talked to a parent last month prior to the early signing period when we were covering all these Pete Golding rumors and all these rumors and not the rumors, but Mike Locksley leaving and all that stuff. I was talking to a parent who said, and we were talking about coaching changes and how that affects recruitment, and she said, Nick Saban doesn't shop at Payless; he shops at Louis Vuitton. So it's not like they're not going to go hire some name just as big, if not bigger, to fill those spots. So it is big impact. I mean, obviously, it might change up some things in this cycle and next cycle, but I don't think it's going to hurt Bama too much as long as Nick Saban's in charge.
How about specific to that DMV pipeline up there in Baltimore and Washington? If in fact Gaddis follows Locksley up there to the University of Maryland, do you think that impacts Alabama all that much from a standpoint of being able to continue to haul significant talent out of that area?
I think it will, but at the same time, you kind of look past that, past having Locksley on staff and past having Gaddis on staff, and Bama's actually been pretty strong. They got Terrell Lewis in the 2016 cycle out of St. John's College. They got Trevon Diggs out of Babylon School up there, and beyond that, just dating back further than that. So I think, obviously, he's going to get his guys up there as well now that he's at Maryland. But I still think Bama will have a pretty strong presence there, maybe not as much as we've seen this past cycle and in 2018 as well. But I don't think it's going to hurt them too much recruiting in that area.
As we let you go, Hank, want to touch on some hoops recruiting. A very, very important official visitor to Alabama's win over Kentucky last Saturday at Coleman Coliseum. Trendon Watford, the 5-star forward from right up the road at Mountain Brook High School. What have you heard in the days since as far as how that visit went and maybe where he's at in making his final determination as to where he'll play college basketball for a year or two.
Yeah, it was the perfect weekend to have him in with the big win over Kentucky, obviously. I briefly texted with his dad about how the visit went. He said it went really well. He said they're definitely on the rise. They're really close to Avery Johnson, and he ended it with them as still at the top of the list. But obviously, Trendon Wofford has the top 4 with Alabama, LSU, Memphis, and Indiana. His brother played at Indiana. He's got ties to Memphis with Penny Hardaway, and obviously LSU is recruiting him really well as well. So I don't think this visit has kind of, gotten him any closer to a decision. I think he's still planning to announce in the spring. There's been a lot of talk about Memphis, obviously with those Penny Hardaway connections, and then LSU too is kind of that dark horse right there, trying to pounce in on him. So it sounds like the visit went well. I mean, I don't think it could have gone any better with that kind of win. Obviously, Ben has been recruiting him for a long, long, long time. They offered him in December of 2015 when I think he was going into his freshman year. So there's a really long-standing relationship. They're very close with Avery Johnson, and that certainly I think is something that could help. So we'll continue to watch it. I put my crystal ball pick on Alabama, I think, in August of 2015. So I haven't changed it yet. I don't think it's a done deal to Alabama, but I still think they're firmly in the mix against schools like Memphis and LSU.
Well, there you go. Hank South, recruiting analyst for BamaOnline.com. As I told you a moment or two ago, right now at BOL, if you want to know where things sit for this 2019 Alabama football recruiting class, Hank's got it all laid out at BamaOnline.com right now. Hank, as always, thanks for the time, my friend.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me, Travis.